In the glittering towers of Sao Paulo, where million-real penthouses pierce the clouds and designer shoes never touch common pavement, billionaire Rafael Mendes had everything money could buy, except the two dirty-faced angels who would change his life forever. What do you think drives someone who has everything to feel completely empty inside? Share your thoughts below. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Avenida Paulista as Rafael Mendes stepped out of his midnight black Bugatti, the car's doors closing with a satisfying thunk that only comes with engineering perfection. At 34, he possessed the kind of wealth that made other billionaires envious: a tech empire, real estate holdings across 3 continents, and a face that graced the covers of Forbes Brazil Monthly. Yet today, as he walked toward the imposing glass facade of Shopping Iguatemi, his jaw was set in a hard line that had become his trademark expression over the past 2 years. 2 years since Valentina Carvalho had shattered not just their engagement, but his fundamental belief that love could exist without a price tag. The memory still burned like acid in his chest. Rafael, querido, you know I love you, but Marcelo's family has connections mine needs. It's not just about money, it's about legacy, about building something bigger than ourselves. Her perfectly manicured hand had slid the 5-carat Tiffany engagement ring across the marble table of their penthouse terrace, the Sao Paulo skyline glittering mockingly behind her. Building something bigger. The words had echoed in his mind for months. What could be bigger than the love he'd thought they shared? What legacy was worth more than the future they'd planned? Now, walking through the polished corridors of Brazil's most exclusive shopping center, Rafael felt the familiar weight of emptiness that no amount of zeros in his bank account could fill. The wedding invitation in his Armani jacket pocket seemed to burn against his chest, thick cream paper with golden edges, announcing the union of Valentina Carvalho and Marcelo Santos Dumont. Old money marrying older money, just as she'd always wanted. He'd RSVP'd yes in a moment of what he now recognized as masochistic curiosity. What was he hoping to prove? That he'd moved on? That he was better off without her? The truth was messier. He needed to see with his own eyes that she was truly happy with her choice. Maybe then he could finally let go of the ghost that haunted every relationship since. The afternoon shoppers moved around him in their bubble of privilege. Women clutching Louis Vuitton bags, men checking Rolex watches, children in designer clothes that cost more than most Brazilians made in a month. This was his world, had always been his world, but lately it felt like walking through a museum of his own life. Rafael paused outside Tiffany & Company, staring at the diamond displays that had once held such promise. A year ago, he might have been selecting a ring for someone new. 6 months ago, he might have cared about finding someone to fill the Valentina-shaped hole in his chest. But now he just felt hollow. The sound of scuffling feet and hushed Portuguese whispers made him turn toward the service corridor that led to the shopping center's loading docks. Most shoppers never noticed these utilitarian spaces that kept their paradise functioning, but Rafael had built his fortune by paying attention to what others overlooked. Miguel, precisamos ser daqui. The security will come soon. The voice was young, female, tinged with the accent of Sao Paulo's periphery. Rafael found himself walking toward the sound, drawn by something he couldn't name. But Bella, I'm still hungry. And it's warm here. I know, meu amor, I know. But we can't stay. We never can. Rafael rounded the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. Huddled against the warm air vent of the shopping center's heating system were 2 children who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Twins, by their identical dark eyes and sharp cheekbones, but so thin that their oversized, donated clothes hung like sails in still wind. The girl, Isabella, he'd heard her called, had her arm wrapped protectively around the boy, Miguel. Her long black hair was matted despite obvious attempts to keep it clean, and her school uniform shirt, though faded and patched, was buttoned all the way to the top with the dignity of someone determined to maintain appearances even in impossible circumstances. Miguel clutched a half-eaten powder acuca that he must have found or been given by a kind vendor. His eyes held that peculiar brightness that comes from chronic hunger, alert, watchful, ancient in a face that should have been carefree. They hadn't noticed Rafael yet, and he found himself frozen, watching as Isabella smoothed Miguel's hair with the tenderness of a mother despite being a child herself. "Tomorrow will be better," she whispered to her brother. "I promise you, Miguel. Tomorrow we'll find somewhere safe, somewhere warm, and maybe someone will want us." The words hit Rafael like a physical blow. Maybe someone will want us. When was the last time he'd wanted anything beyond revenge? Beyond proving something to a woman who'd chosen social climbing over love? When was the last time he'd felt needed by someone who couldn't benefit from his wealth? "Excuse me," he said softly. approaching slowly as one might approach startled animals. Both children scrambled to their feet, Isabella immediately stepping in front of Miguel with a fierceness that would have been admirable if it weren't so heartbreaking. "We weren't stealing, Senhor," she said quickly, her chin raised in defiance even as her voice shook. "We were just warm here. We'll leave now." "Wait." Raphael held up his hands, palms out. "I'm not security. I'm just—" What was he exactly? "I'm just someone who wondered if you were okay." Miguel peered around his sister's protective stance, his eyes taking in Raphael's expensive suit, his Patek Philippe watch, his handmade Italian shoes. "Are you a prince?" he asked with the straightforward curiosity that only children possess. Raphael almost smiled for the first time in months. "No, I'm not a prince. I'm Raphael. What are your names?" "I'm Isabella, and this is Miguel," the girl said, still wary but something in Raphael's tone seeming to ease her defensive posture. "We're twins." "I can see that." Raphael knelt down, bringing himself closer to their eye level. Up close, he could see that despite their circumstances, someone had cared for these children recently. Their faces were clean, their clothes mended with careful stitches. "Are you here alone?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Our Vovo died last month. She was taking care of us after our parents had the accident. But the landlord said we couldn't stay without an adult, and we have no other family." The story spilled out in the way that children's stories do, honest, devastating in its simplicity. Their grandmother had been their world after their parents died in a bus accident 2 years ago. She'd worked as a cleaning lady, barely making enough to keep food on the table and Isabella and Miguel in school, but she'd never let them feel like burdens. She used to say we were her little miracles, Miguel added, his voice small. She said God gave us to her because she needed something beautiful to take care of. Raphael felt something crack open in his chest, not the brittle breaking of heartache he'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper, warmer. These children spoke of love the way he'd forgotten love could exist, without conditions, without transactions, without ulterior motives. "Where have you been staying since then?" he asked. "Different places," Isabella said evasively. "We're good at being quiet and not bothering anyone." Being quiet and not bothering anyone. Raphael thought of his own childhood. Private schools, nannies, every want anticipated and fulfilled. These children were learning to disappear, to take up no space, to expect nothing. The injustice of it made him feel sick. "Have you eaten today?" Both children looked at each other, having a silent conversation in the way that twins sometimes do. "We had breakfast," Miguel said finally, which Raphael suspected meant they'd shared something small hours ago. Without thinking, Raphael reached into his wallet and pulled out several hundred real notes. Isabella's eyes widened, but she stepped back. "We're not beggars, Senhor," she said with wounded pride. "We don't want your pity." The dignity in her voice reminded Raphael of himself at that age, determined to prove he didn't need anything from anyone, even when he desperately did. But whereas his childhood defiance had been about asserting independence from privilege, hers was about maintaining humanity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances. "It's not pity," Raphael said carefully. It's because I think maybe I need you as much as you might need help." Both children stared at him with the frank assessment that only children can manage. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. Raphael looked at these two small faces, so serious and so hopeful despite everything life had thrown at them, and felt the first stirring of purpose he'd experienced since Valentina had walked away. "I mean," he said slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane, "that I have somewhere very important to go tonight, and I think it would be much better if I didn't go alone." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Raphael could hear the distant sounds of the shopping center, elevator music, clicking heels, the soft chatter of people whose biggest concern was whether to buy the Hermes bag in black or cognac. Here, in this forgotten corner, 3 lives hung suspended in a moment that would change everything. "You want us to come with you somewhere?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying the weight of a child who'd learned that adult promises often came with hidden costs. Raphael nodded, his mind racing. What he was considering was unprecedented, possibly irresponsible, and definitely the most impulsive thing he'd ever contemplated. But looking at these children, at their careful dignity, their fierce love for each other, their heartbreaking hope, he knew he couldn't walk away. "There's a wedding tonight," he said slowly. "A very fancy wedding, with lots of important people. I was planning to go alone, but... He paused, meeting Isabella's eyes. But I think it would be much better if I had a family with me. Miguel's face lit up with wonder. A real wedding? With a bride in a white dress and flowers and cake? Lots of cake, Raphael confirmed, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. And music, and dancing, and probably the most beautiful party you've ever seen. But we don't have nice clothes, Isabella said practically, though Raphael could see the yearning in her eyes. We don't belong at a place like that. You belong anywhere I say you belong, Raphael replied with a conviction that surprised him. And as for clothes... He glanced at his Rolex, a habit that usually reminded him how much time he was wasting, but today felt like counting down to something important. The shopping center doesn't close for another 3 hours. That's plenty of time. Isabella and Miguel exchanged another of their silent twin conversations, a rapid communication of raised eyebrows and slight nods that spoke of a bond forged by necessity and strengthened by survival. Why? Isabella asked finally. Why would you want us there? It was such a simple question, but Raphael found himself struggling for an answer that wouldn't sound either condescending or completely unhinged. How could he explain that seeing them, seeing their love for each other, their resilience, their unshakable humanity despite everything, had reminded him of something he'd forgotten he was missing? Because, he said finally, I think you two understand something about love that I forgot. And maybe you can help me remember. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of what really matters in life? Tell us about that moment in the comments. 2 hours later, Raphael stood outside the dressing room at Riachuelo Kids, holding small shopping bags and wearing an expression that his business rivals would have found incomprehensible. The billionaire who could negotiate billion-real deals without blinking was nervous about 2 8-year-olds trying on clothes. Bella, I look like a prince. Miguel's voice carried through the thin dressing room door, filled with delight. You are a prince, Isabella replied, her own voice thick with emotion. Look at us, Miguel. Look at how we look. Raphael had insisted on the best the store had to offer, a navy blue suit with proper dress shoes for Miguel, and for Isabella, a dress in deep emerald green that he'd somehow known would bring out her eyes. The saleswoman had been skeptical at first. What was a man like Rafael Mendez doing with 2 obviously street children? But his Black American Express card had a way of silencing questions. The dressing room door opened, and Raphael felt his breath catch. The transformation was startling, but not in the way he'd expected. It wasn't that the expensive clothes had changed who Isabella and Miguel were. It was that they finally looked like who they'd always been beneath the circumstances that had tried to define them. Miguel stood straight and proud in his little suit, his hair freshly washed and combed. The store's beauty counter had been surprisingly accommodating when Raphael explained what he needed. But it was his smile that transformed him completely. Bright, uninhibited joy that lit up his entire face. Isabella was more reserved, smoothing the green dress with hands that trembled slightly. She looked older than her 8 years, but also impossibly young, caught between the premature adulthood that poverty had forced on her and the child she deserved to still be. Do we look appropriate? She asked, using the word carefully, as if she'd been storing it up for a special occasion. You look perfect, Raphael said, and meant it. You look exactly like who you are. The saleswoman, Maria, her name tag read, had been watching the entire interaction with growing fascination. Senhor Mendez, she said quietly, if you don't mind me saying, these children are lucky to have found you. I think, Raphael said, watching as Miguel spun in a circle to see how his jacket flared, I'm the lucky one. The drive to the wedding venue gave Raphael time to second-guess everything he was about to do. His driver, Carlos, kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the 2 children buckled carefully into the back seat of the Bentley, their faces pressed to the windows as Sao Paulo's skyline glittered past them. Raphael, Isabella said softly, using his first name for the first time, what if the people at the wedding don't like us? What if they stare? Miguel added, his earlier excitement now tinged with worry. Raphael turned to face them, seeing his own reflection in the partition glass, a man who'd spent 2 years building walls around his heart, now willingly walking into the one place guaranteed to tear them down. Listen to me, he said seriously. Some of them might stare. Some of them might not understand why you're there. But here's what I want you to remember. You have as much right to be in that room as anyone else. More right than some of them, actually, because you know what real love looks like. What do you mean? Miguel asked. Raphael thought about how to explain it. Love isn't about money, or status, or what your family name is. It's about taking care of each other, even when it's hard. It's about staying together even when the world tries to pull you apart. You two have been doing that your whole lives. Isabella reached over and took Miguel's hand, a gesture so natural and protective that Rafael felt his throat tighten. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you know what real love looks like?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Did he? He'd thought he did. Once. He'd thought what he felt for Valentina was real, deep, worth building a life around. But faced with her ultimatum, love or legacy, heart or social advancement, he'd learned how fragile his certainty really was. "I'm learning," he said honestly. "I think maybe you two are teaching me." The Palacio dos Cedros was São Paulo's most exclusive wedding venue, a restored 19th-century mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and staffed by people trained to cater to Brazil's wealthiest families. As their Bentley pulled into the circular drive behind a parade of luxury vehicles, Rafael felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with entering his ex-fiancée's world. Valentina had always loved places like this, venues where the guest list was really a social registry, where being seen mattered more than the actual celebration. Looking at it now through Isabella and Miguel's wide eyes, Rafael saw it differently. Beautiful, yes, but also cold, performative, designed to impress rather than embrace. "It's like a castle," Miguel whispered, staring up at the mansion's illuminated facade. "It's like something from a fairy tale," Isabella agreed, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Are we really allowed to go inside?" "We're not just allowed," Rafael said, adjusting his bow tie with hands that were steadier than he felt. "We're invited guests. Hold your heads high." As they walked up the red-carpeted steps, Rafael found himself flanked by the twins, their small hands somehow finding his without him realizing it. Miguel's grip was firm and trusting. Isabella's was more tentative, ready to let go at the first sign that she wasn't welcome. The doorman, impeccably dressed and trained to recognize wealth at a glance, took in Rafael's appearance and smiled with professional warmth. Then his eyes moved to the children, and Rafael watched his expression shift through confusion, calculation, and finally, practiced neutrality. "Boa noite, Senhor Mendes," the doorman said smoothly. "The ceremony is about to begin in the main salon." They passed through the marble foyer, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across walls lined with priceless art. Other guests milled about in clusters, women in couture gowns comparing jewelry, men in bespoke tuxedos discussing business deals, everyone performing the careful dance of high society where every conversation had three layers: what was said, what was meant, and what was calculated. Rafael felt eyes beginning to turn toward them. Not the casual glances of social recognition he was used to, but sharp, curious stares that took in every detail of his unusual companions. "Rafael? Rafael Mendes." The voice belonged to Patricia Santos, wife of one of São Paulo's banking dynasties and a woman who collected gossip like some people collected art. She approached with the predatory smile of someone who just spotted the evening's most interesting scandal. "Patricia," Rafael said coolly, his arms moving protectively around Isabella and Miguel's shoulders. "How lovely to see you. And who are these charming children?" Patricia asked, her eyes bright with curiosity that was anything but innocent. Before Rafael could respond, Miguel stepped forward with the fearless confidence that only children possess. "I'm Miguel, and this is my sister Isabella," he said proudly. "Rafael brought us to the party because we're family." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Rafael felt Isabella stiffen beside him, probably realizing the implications of what her brother had just declared. But Miguel looked up at Rafael with such complete trust that Rafael felt something fundamental shift in his chest. "Family," he repeated quietly, meeting Patricia's shocked gaze. "Yes, that's exactly right." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around them, other conversations began to pause as words spread through the crowd with the speed that only truly scandalous news could achieve. "Rafael Mendes has brought children to the wedding. Street children, by the look of them." He called them family. But Rafael found he didn't care about the whispers, the stares, the social calculations happening around them. For the first time in 2 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be, with exactly the people he wanted to be with. "Shall we find our seats?" he asked Isabella and Miguel, his voice carrying a confidence that surprised him. As they walked toward the main salon, Rafael caught sight of himself in one of the antique mirrors lining the hallway. The man looking back at him was still recognizably Rafael Mendes. Same expensive tuxedo, same sharp features, same unmistakable bearing of wealth and power. But there was something different in his eyes. Something that had been missing for so long he'd forgotten it was gone. He looked happy. Behind him, Isabella and Miguel walked with their heads high, their small hand still holding his, their presence transforming him from a bitter ex-lover seeking closure into something he'd never expected to become, a protector, a provider, a father. The ceremony was about to begin, and Raphael had no idea what would happen when Valentina saw them. But for the first time since receiving her wedding invitation, he wasn't walking into that room to prove anything to her. He was walking in to prove something to himself. The main salon of the Palacio dos Cedros had been transformed into a vision of opulent romance that screamed expensive taste rather than whispered genuine love. White roses flown in from Colombia cascaded from crystal chandeliers, their petals scattered across an aisle lined with chairs upholstered in ivory silk. The altar, framed by towering arrangements of white orchids and baby's breath, stood beneath a canopy of fairy lights that cast everything in a golden glow designed to be Instagram perfect. As Raphael and the twins entered the salon, the low murmur of sophisticated conversation began to shift. Heads turned with the subtle choreography of high society. Never obvious staring, but a ripple of awareness that moved through the assembled guests like a stone dropped in still water. Raphael had attended dozens of weddings in venues like this, but seeing it through Isabella and Miguel's eyes made everything feel different. Miguel's mouth hung slightly open as he took in the grandeur, while Isabella's grip on Raphael's hand tightened, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of wealth on display. "There are so many flowers," Isabella whispered. "More flowers than in the whole market. And look at the ladies' dresses," Miguel added, his voice filled with wonder. "They sparkle like Christmas lights." Their innocent observations carried in the acoustically perfect room, and Raphael noticed several nearby guests exchange glances. He recognized the look, the careful, practiced expression of people trying to place this unexpected development in their mental filing system of social hierarchies and appropriate behavior. An usher approached them, his professional smile wavering slightly as he took in the unusual family group. "Senhor Mendez, I have your seat assignment here." He consulted his tablet, clearly expecting to escort a party of one. "We'll need 2 additional chairs," Raphael said calmly, as if bringing unannounced children to Brazil's wedding of the year was the most natural thing in the world. The usher's training kicked in. "Of course, Senhor. Right away." As they were led to their seats, 3rd row, center aisle, a position that ensured maximum visibility, Raphael caught sight of familiar faces throughout the crowd. Business associates, social acquaintances, members of São Paulo's interconnected elite families. All of them watching, calculating, wondering. But it was the figure in the front row that made Raphael's breath catch. Valentina's mother, Dona Carmen Carvalho, sat ramrod straight in midnight blue Valentino, her diamond necklace catching the light as she turned to see what was causing the subtle commotion behind her. Their eyes met across the rows of guests, and Raphael watched her perfectly composed face cycle through surprise, confusion, and what might have been concern. Dona Carmen had always liked him, had even confided once that she thought Valentina was making a mistake. But seeing him here, tonight, with 2 clearly underprivileged children, she leaned over to whisper something to her husband, and Raphael watched the news begin its journey through the family section like a controlled wildfire. "Raphael," Isabella whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Everyone is looking at us." "Let them look," he replied softly, but he could feel the weight of those stares on his shoulders. More than that, he could see how they were affecting Isabella and Miguel. The confidence they'd gained in their new clothes was beginning to waver under the scrutiny of 200 pairs of judgmental eyes. "Are we in trouble?" Miguel asked quietly, his earlier excitement dimming. Before Raphael could answer, the string quartet began to play, and the assembled guests rose as one. The bridal procession was beginning. First came the bridesmaids, 6 women Raphael recognized from Valentina's social circle, each dressed in blush pink silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. They moved down the aisle with practiced grace, their smiles perfect for the photographer documenting every moment. Then the music shifted, and everyone turned toward the back of the salon as the bride appeared. Valentina Carvalho had always been beautiful, but on her wedding day, she was luminous. Her dress was a masterpiece of French couture, ivory silk with hand-beaded details that caught the light with every step. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon adorned with her grandmother's diamond tiara, and her makeup was flawless in the way that only international artists could achieve. She began her slow walk down the aisle, her eyes focused on Marcelo Santos Dumont waiting at the altar. Marcelo, heir to one of Brazil's oldest coffee fortunes, looked appropriately groom-like in his custom tuxedo, his smile warm but somehow calculated, as if he were performing the role of happy bridegroom rather than actually feeling it. Valentina was halfway down the aisle when her gaze began to sweep the assembled guests in the traditional bridal acknowledgement of those who'd come to witness her big day. Raphael watched her eyes move across the familiar faces, family, friends, business connections, and then stopped dead when they reached the third row. The pause was almost imperceptible, but Raphael caught it. Valentina's step faltered for just a moment, her professional smile flickering as she took in the sight of her ex-fiancé sitting with two children who clearly didn't belong in her carefully curated world. Their eyes met across the sea of guests, and Raphael felt the full force of history between them. 2 years of shared dreams, planned futures, whispered promises. The weight of the ring she'd given back, the echo of words that couldn't be unsaid, the ghost of a love that had died not from lack of feeling but from incompatible values. But something had changed. Looking at her now, Raphael didn't feel the familiar stab of loss and anger. Instead, he felt curious. Curious about the woman who'd chosen this performance over what they'd had. Curious about whether she was truly happy with her choice. Beside him, Isabella leaned closer. "Is that her?" she whispered. "The bride you came to see?" "Yes," Raphael replied softly. "That's Valentina." "She's very pretty," Miguel observed with a frank assessment of childhood. "But she looks sad. Are brides supposed to look sad?" Out of the mouths of babes. Raphael studied Valentina's face more carefully and realized Miguel was right. Beneath the professional bridal glow, there was something hollow in her expression, something that spoke of obligation rather than joy. Valentina continued her walk toward the altar, but Raphael noticed her eyes kept drifting back to their row, specifically to Isabella and Miguel. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite read, surprise, certainly, but also something that might have been longing. The ceremony began with the traditional Catholic rituals, conducted by Padre Francisco, who'd been officiating weddings for São Paulo's elite families for 3 decades. His voice carried clearly through the salon as he spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. Marriage, Padre Francisco intoned, is not merely the joining of two individuals, but the creation of a family built on love, sacrifice, and mutual devotion. Raphael felt Isabella shift beside him, and glanced down to see her watching the ceremony with the intense focus of someone trying to understand a foreign language. Miguel, meanwhile, was entranced by the pageantry, the flowers, the music, the fairy-tale setting that validated every Disney movie he'd probably ever glimpsed. As the priest continued, Raphael found himself actually listening to the words for the first time in any wedding ceremony he'd attended. Usually, these events were social obligations, opportunities for networking disguised as celebrations. But sitting here with Isabella and Miguel, he heard the deeper meaning beneath the religious language. Love, sacrifice, and mutual devotion. When was the last time he'd experienced any of those things? When was the last time someone had needed his protection rather than his bank account? When had he last felt the fierce, uncomplicated love he saw between these twins? "Do you, Valentina Carmen Carvalho," Padre Francisco asked, "take Marcelo Augusto Santos Dumont to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" The traditional pause stretched longer than it should have. Valentina's eyes swept the congregation once more, landing again on Raphael and the children. For a moment that felt eternal, she seemed to be weighing something, calculating not just her words but her entire future. She began, and the pause that followed made the entire congregation hold its breath. "What do you think Valentina is feeling in this moment? Is she having second thoughts? Share your predictions below." "I do," Valentina said finally, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that Raphael was sure he wasn't the only one to notice. The ceremony continued, but Raphael became aware of a shift in the energy of the room. Whispered conversations were starting in the back rows, speculative glances were being exchanged, and he could feel the building tension of a social gathering where something unexpected was about to happen. It started small. A woman in the row behind them leaning over to her companion. "Those children with Rafael Mendez, where do you suppose they came from?" "I heard someone say he called them family," came the whispered reply. "But that's impossible. Everyone knows Rafael never had children." The whispers spread like ripples across the salon, carried by the invisible network of gossip that powered high society events. Raphael could feel Isabella and Miguel becoming increasingly aware of the attention, their small bodies tensing as they realized they were the subject of speculation. "Raphael," Isabella whispered urgently, "maybe we should go. People are talking about us." "We're not going anywhere," Raphael replied firmly, though he could feel his own frustration building. These were supposed to be sophisticated people, educated and cultured, yet they were behaving like schoolyard bullies faced with someone who didn't fit their narrow definitions of belonging. The ceremony reached the exchange of rings, and Raphael watched as Marcelo slipped a massive diamond onto Valentina's finger with the mechanical precision of someone completing a business transaction. There was no trembling hands, no tears of joy, no sense that this moment would be remembered as one of the most important in their lives. It felt, Raphael realized, exactly like the kind of marriage Valentina had wanted with him. Appropriate. Strategic. Socially advantageous. Miguel tugged on Raphael's sleeve. "Why is everyone whispering?" he asked, his voice small. Before Raphael could answer, a woman in the row directly behind them spoke loudly enough to be clearly heard. "I just think it's inappropriate, bringing street children to a wedding like this. There's a time and place for charity work." The comment hung in the air like a slap. Raphael felt Isabella flinch beside him, and Miguel's face crumpled with the devastating comprehension that they weren't welcome, that their presence was seen as some kind of contamination of the sacred social order. That was the moment Rafael Mendez, billionaire, entrepreneur, man who'd built an empire through calculated risks and strategic thinking, stopped caring about propriety, social consequences, or what anyone in this room thought about him. He stood up. The action was so unexpected, so unprecedented in the middle of a wedding ceremony, that the whispers stopped dead. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward him, and even Padre Francisco paused in his blessing of the rings. At the altar, Valentina's face went white. Marcelo looked confused, then annoyed. In the front row, Dona Carmen's eyes widened with something that might have been panic or anticipation. "Excuse me," Raphael said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I'd like to say something." "Raphael, no," Isabella whispered desperately, tugging on his jacket. "Please, let's just go." But Raphael was done running from uncomfortable truths, done allowing other people's narrow worldview to determine his choices. Done pretending that the values of this glittering crowd meant anything compared to the honest love he'd witnessed between two 8-year-old children who'd lost everything but each other. "Padre Francisco," he said, addressing the priest directly, "you spoke about marriage being the creation of a family built on love, sacrifice, and mutual devotion. I wanted everyone here to see what that actually looks like." He placed his hands on Isabella and Miguel's shoulders, feeling them trembling beneath his touch. "These are my children," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "Isabella and Miguel Mendez. They've taught me more about real love in one afternoon than I learned in 34 years of life. They've shown me what it means to protect someone weaker than yourself, to sacrifice for someone you care about, to choose love over convenience." The silence in the room was deafening. At the altar, Valentina looked like she might faint. Marcelo's face had gone red with embarrassment or anger. Throughout the congregation, Raphael could see shock, disapproval, confusion, and in a few faces, what might have been admiration. "I came here tonight thinking I needed closure," Raphael continued, his eyes finding Valentina's across the distance. "Thinking I needed to see that you'd chosen correctly, that what we had wasn't as real as what you found with Marcelo." Isabella looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, but also with something else, a growing understanding that he was fighting for them, protecting them in the way that family protects family. "But sitting here, watching this ceremony, I realized I already have everything I need. I have a family. I have love that doesn't come with conditions or calculations. I have two people who need me not for what I can buy them, but for who I choose to be with them." Raphael could see tears streaming down Isabella's face, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of something else entirely: recognition, belonging, the overwhelming relief of finally being chosen instead of tolerated. Miguel, meanwhile, had straightened his small shoulders and was looking around the room with a defiance that reminded Raphael of his sister's fierce protectiveness. "So congratulations, Valentina," Raphael said, his voice gentle now, almost tender. "I hope you find the happiness you were looking for. As for us, we have somewhere else to be." He offered his arms to Isabella and Miguel, who took them without hesitation. As they turned to leave, walking back down the aisle they'd entered with such different expectations, Raphael could feel the weight of 200 stares, the buzz of shocked conversation beginning to build behind them. But he could also feel something else: the solid, warm weight of Isabella's hand in his, the trust in Miguel's grip on his other arm, and the absolute certainty that for the first time in 2 years, he was exactly where he belonged. They were almost to the doors when Valentina's voice rang out across the salon. high and clear and desperate. Wait. The single word echoed through the salon like a gunshot, freezing everyone mid-breath. Raphael stopped at the threshold, Isabella and Miguel flanking him like small sentinels. Their faces turned back toward the altar where Valentina stood in her ivory silk and diamonds, looking like a beautiful statue that had suddenly come to life. "Valentina," Marcelo hissed, his voice carrying in the acoustic perfection of the room. "What are you doing?" But Valentina wasn't looking at her groom. Her eyes were locked on the three figures silhouetted against the salon's entrance, and her face was cycling through emotions too complex and too rapid for the assembled guests to follow. "I said wait," she repeated, and began walking down the aisle toward them. The movement sent a ripple of shock through the congregation. Brides didn't abandon their grooms at the altar. They certainly didn't chase after their ex-fiancés in front of 200 witnesses. This was beyond scandalous. It was unprecedented. "Valentina." Dona Carmen's voice cracked like a whip, but her daughter continued walking, her beaded train whispering against the silk-covered aisle runner. Raphael felt Isabella's hand tighten in his. "What's happening?" she whispered. "I don't know," Raphael admitted, because he truly didn't. The Valentina he knew was calculated, controlled, someone who planned every social move 3 steps in advance. This impulsive abandonment of protocol was so unlike her that he wondered if she'd suffered some kind of breakdown. Valentina reached them, slightly breathless, her carefully arranged hair beginning to come loose from its pins. Up close, Raphael could see that her wedding makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, the tension lines around her mouth. Miguel had been right. She did look sad. "You can't leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not like this. Not after what you just said." Behind her, the salon buzzed with barely contained chaos. Marcelo had stepped down from the altar and was striding toward them, his face dark with humiliation. Padre Francisco looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. Wedding guests were pulling out phones, undoubtedly already texting the scandal to everyone they knew. "Valentina," Raphael said carefully, "you're getting married. You should go back to your groom." "Should I?" she asked, and there was something desperate in her voice that Raphael had never heard before. "Should I really? After hearing you talk about real love, about what family actually means?" She turned to look at Isabella and Miguel, who were watching this adult drama unfold with the wide-eyed fascination of children witnessing something they didn't fully understand but instinctively knew was important. "These are your children?" Valentina asked, kneeling down so she was at eye level with the twins, apparently oblivious to what the movement was doing to her expensive dress. Isabella and Miguel exchanged one of their silent communications. Then Isabella stepped forward with the careful dignity that seemed to be her trademark. "We're his family now," she said simply. "He chose us, and we chose him." "He chose you," Valentina repeated, her voice wonderstruck. "Just like that? Without knowing your background, your family history, your potential?" Miguel tilted his head with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Lady, why are you crying at your own wedding? Isn't getting married supposed to make you happy?" The question hit like a physical blow. Valentina's hand flew to her cheek, coming away wet with tears she apparently didn't realize she was shedding. "Valentina, that's enough." Marcelo's voice boomed across the salon as he reached them, his face mottled with rage and embarrassment. "This is our wedding day. These people are witnesses to our union, not some melodrama starring your ex-boyfriend and his charity cases." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Raphael felt Isabella flinch at charity cases, saw Miguel's small face crumple with hurt, and felt something dangerous and protective rise in his chest. But before he could respond, Valentina rose to her feet with fluid grace, turned to face her groom, and said in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the salon, "Don't you ever speak about children that way again." The rebuke was so sharp, so unexpected from the woman who'd spent 2 years prioritizing social advancement over personal feelings, that Marcelo actually stepped back. What?" he stammered. "You heard me," Valentina said, her voice growing stronger. "These children have done nothing wrong. They're here because Raphael cares about them, because he's trying to give them something beautiful to remember. And you." She looked at her groom, really looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You just called them charity cases. At our wedding. In front of everyone." "Valentina, you're being hysterical," Marcelo said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "It's been a long day. You're overwhelmed." "I'm not hysterical," she interrupted. I'm awake. Maybe for the first time in 2 years, I'm actually awake. She turned back to Raphael, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen since their early days together. Not the calculating socialite she'd become, but the woman he'd fallen in love with before ambition had hardened her into someone else. When you and I were together, she said, her voice carrying in the shocked silence, I used to dream about our children. Did you know that? I used to imagine what they'd look like, what we'd teach them, how we'd love them. Raphael felt his throat tighten. Valentina. But somewhere along the way, I stopped dreaming about love and started planning for advantage. I started thinking about bloodlines instead of bedtime stories, about social connections instead of family dinners. I convinced myself that was maturity, that was being practical. She gestured toward the opulent salon, the crystal chandeliers, the hundreds of thousands of riaris worth of flowers that would be thrown away tomorrow. Look at this wedding, Raphael. Look at all of this. It's beautiful, it's perfect, it's everything I thought I wanted. But do you know what's missing? What? Miguel asked, because children always want to know the answer to direct questions. Valentina smiled at him, and for the first time all evening, the expression reached her eyes. Joy, she said simply. There's no joy here. There's expectation, there's obligation, there's social climbing dressed up as romance. But there's no joy. She looked back at Raphael, then at Isabella and Miguel. But watching you three walk into this room tonight, seeing how you looked at each other, how you protected each other, that was joy. That was what I gave up when I gave up on us. The salon was so quiet that the sound of someone's phone buzzing seemed as loud as a fire alarm. Marcelo looked like he was calculating whether it would be better to drag his bride back to the altar or cut his losses and run. Dona Carmen appeared to be praying. Valentina, Raphael said carefully, what are you saying? She reached up and began pulling the pins from her hair, letting the carefully constructed bridal coiffure fall loose around her shoulders. Then she reached behind her neck and unclasped her grandmother's diamond tiara, holding it out to her mother, who was now openly weeping in the front row. I'm saying, Valentina announced to the room, that I can't marry a man who would call children charity cases. I can't build a life with someone who thinks love is something you calculate instead of something you feel. And I can't pretend anymore that status and security are worth more than genuine happiness. She turned to Marcelo, who looked like he'd been struck by lightning. I'm sorry, Marcelo. You're a good man, and you deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. But that's not me. It never was me. We both knew this was about our family's expectations more than our feelings. You're making a mistake, Marcelo said, but his voice lacked conviction. A huge mistake that you'll regret for the rest of your life. Maybe, Valentina agreed, but it will be my mistake to make. She began walking back toward Raphael and the twins, but stopped halfway, turning to address the stunned congregation. I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight expecting a wedding. I know this is shocking, and I know it's going to cause talk, but I realized something watching Raphael with these children. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose love over expectation, authenticity over appropriateness. She paused, her eyes finding her mother's in the crowd. Mommy, I know you wanted this for me. I know you thought it was the right choice, the safe choice. But I can't be safe anymore. I want to be happy. I want to be real. I want what Raphael has found with Isabella and Miguel, a family built on choice instead of obligation. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the back of the salon, came the sound of slow clapping. One person, then another, then a small wave of applause that rippled through about a third of the guests, the ones, Raphael realized, who had been watching this performance of appropriate marriage with their own private doubts. Valentina reached them again, her wedding dress now wrinkled and her makeup streaked with tears, but looking more alive than Raphael had seen her in years. I don't know what happens now, she said quietly, addressing Raphael but including Isabella and Miguel in her gaze. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for the choice I made 2 years ago. I don't know if there's any way back from this. She knelt down again, this time addressing the twins directly. But I want you to know that what Raphael said about you, about real love, about family, that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. You're lucky to have each other, and you're lucky to have him. Isabella studied Valentina's face with a serious assessment that seemed to be her specialty. Are you going to be okay? She asked with the straightforward concern of someone who knew what it felt like to have your whole world change in an instant. The question seemed to break something open in Valentina. She laughed, and it was the first genuine sound Raphael had heard from her all evening. "You know what?" she said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I think I might be. For the first time in a long time, I think I might actually be okay." Behind them, the salon was erupting into chaos as guests tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Phone cameras were flashing, urgent conversations were breaking out, and someone was arguing loudly about whether the reception should still go forward. But in the small circle formed by Raphael, Isabella, Miguel, and Valentina, there was an unexpected peace. The calm that comes after a storm when you realize you've survived something that felt unsurvivable. "What happens now?" Raphael asked, echoing Valentina's earlier question. "Now," Valentina said, standing and smoothing her wrinkled dress, "I think I need to learn how to be myself again. And maybe..." She looked at the twins, then back at Raphael. "Maybe I need to learn what real family looks like." Miguel tugged on Raphael's sleeve. "Can we go get that cake now?" he asked. "All this talking is making me hungry." The laughter that erupted from all four of them was so genuine, so full of relief and possibility, that several nearby guests turned to stare at this strange new family unit that had just blown up São Paulo's social event of the year. "Yes," Raphael said, lifting Miguel up so he could see over the crowd of shocked wedding guests. "I think it's definitely time for cake." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Raphael's penthouse, casting golden rectangles across the marble floors that had once echoed with the lonely footsteps of a man who'd forgotten how to be happy. Now, those same floors vibrated with the chaos of childhood. Isabella's schoolbooks scattered across the dining table, Miguel's football bouncing down the hallway, and the sound of genuine laughter that made the expensive apartment feel like a home for the first time since Raphael had bought it. "Papai Raphael." Miguel's voice carried from the kitchen, where he was supposedly eating breakfast but was more likely building architectural masterpieces with his cereal. "Isabella says I can't wear my football jersey to the charity gala tonight." "That's because it's a fancy party, Su Bobo," Isabella called back, her voice carrying the patient exasperation of an older sister, though she was older by only 12 minutes. "We talked about this. Nice clothes for nice parties." Raphael smiled as he adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror, remembering a time when getting dressed for events like tonight felt like putting on armor for battle. The annual São Paulo Children's Foundation Gala had always been one of those obligatory social functions. Write a check, make an appearance, network with other wealthy people who were also writing checks. Tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't going as Rafael Mendez, the billionaire making a tax-deductible donation. He was going as Rafael Mendez the father, accompanied by 2 children who transformed his understanding of what wealth actually meant. "Isabella's right, Miguel," Rafael called toward the kitchen as he walked down the hall. "But don't worry, your nice clothes are just as comfortable as your football jersey." He found them at the breakfast table, a scene that still made his heart clench with gratitude every morning. Isabella was carefully reviewing Miguel's homework. She'd appointed herself his academic supervisor, while Miguel was indeed constructing something elaborate with his granola clusters. Both were dressed in their school uniforms, their faces clean and bright, their hair neatly brushed, small details that represented the security and stability they'd never had before. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months ago, a process that should have taken longer but had been expedited by Rafael's lawyers and his ability to provide everything the courts required for child welfare. Isabella and Miguel Mendez now legally belonged to each other and to him, a family created not by blood but by choice. "Good morning, meus amores," Rafael said, kissing the top of Isabella's head and ruffling Miguel's hair as he sat down with his coffee. "Bom dia, papai," they chorused, and Rafael still felt a jolt of joy every time they called him that. It had started tentatively, a few weeks after the wedding that had changed all their lives, when Miguel had asked if it was okay to call him something more than Rafael. The word papai had felt natural, right, like something that had been waiting to be spoken. "So," Rafael said, spreading jam on his toast, "are you too excited about tonight?" "I'm nervous," Isabella admitted, a trait she developed as she'd grown more comfortable expressing her feelings. "There will be so many important people there. And cameras," Miguel added, bouncing in his chair. "Isabella says there might be photographers from the magazines." Rafael nodded seriously. The gala would indeed be a media event, with society photographers documenting which families had donated what amounts to the Children's Foundation. 6 months ago, the prospect of being photographed with Isabella and Miguel might have felt like a public relations move. Now, it felt like an opportunity to show the world what his family looked like. Remember what we talked about, Raphael said gently. You belong at that party just as much as anyone else. More than some people, actually, because you understand what the money is really for. The foundation supported street children throughout Sao Paulo, providing shelter, education, and family reunification services. Raphael had been a donor for years, but it was only after meeting Isabella and Miguel that he truly understood the human faces behind the statistics. Will she be there? Isabella asked quietly, using the pronoun she always employed when referring to Valentina. Yes, Raphael said. She'll be there. The relationship between Raphael and Valentina over the past 6 months had been complicated. After the dramatic end to her wedding, she disappeared from Sao Paulo society for several weeks, traveling to her family's ranch in Minas Gerais to, in her words, remember who I used to be before I became someone I didn't recognize. When she'd returned, she'd been different. More like the woman Raphael had fallen in love with years ago, but also changed in ways that went deeper than just abandoning her social climbing ambitions. She'd started working with a literacy program in the favelas, teaching children like Isabella and Miguel had been. She'd sold most of her designer wardrobe and moved from her family's mansion to a modest apartment in Villa Madalena. Most importantly, she'd asked if she could be part of Isabella and Miguel's lives, not as Raphael's romantic partner, but as someone who cared about them and wanted to help them thrive. It had been Isabella, with her 8-year-old wisdom, who'd made the decision. She seems sad but trying not to be sad, Isabella had observed after Valentina's first tentative visit. Like maybe she needs a family too. So Valentina had become Tia Valentina, not quite a stepmother, not exactly a family friend, but something uniquely their own. She picked the twins up from school sometimes, helped Isabella with her Portuguese homework, and never missed one of Miguel's football matches. The arrangement shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. Maybe because all 4 of them had learned that families could be built in unconventional ways, that love didn't always follow the pattern society expected. Is she bringing anyone? Miguel asked, because he was endlessly curious about adult relationships. No, Raphael said. She's coming alone. Valentina had dated briefly, a doctor who worked at the free clinic where she volunteered, but it hadn't developed into anything serious. When Raphael had asked her about it, they developed the kind of friendship that allowed for such questions. She'd smiled sadly and said she was still learning how to love someone without calculating the social advantages. Good, Isabella said firmly. We don't need any more complications. Raphael laughed. Complications had become Isabella's word for anything that threatened their family's equilibrium. New teachers at school were complications until proven trustworthy. Raphael's business trips were complications that required extensive planning and daily phone calls. Even Miguel's tendency to make friends with every stray dog in their neighborhood was classified as a complication, though Isabella always ended up helping him sneak food to them. The sound of the doorbell interrupted their breakfast routine. Raphael checked his watch, too early for most visitors, but he had a suspicion about who it might be. That's probably Tia Valentina, he told the twins. She said she might stop by before tonight to see your outfits. Isabella and Miguel raced to the door, their earlier breakfast forgotten. Raphael followed more slowly, still amazed by how naturally they'd all fallen into this rhythm of family life. Valentina stood in the penthouse doorway holding a small wrapped box and looking nervous in the way she always did when she wasn't sure if she was overstepping boundaries. She'd cut her hair shorter and stopped wearing the heavy makeup that had been part of her society armor. In jeans and a simple white blouse, she looked younger, more approachable, more like the woman Raphael remembered from their early relationship. Bom dia, meus tesouros, she said as Isabella and Miguel launched themselves at her for hugs. The greeting meant good morning, my treasures, and it had become her special phrase for them. Tia Valentina. Miguel grabbed her hand, pulling her into the apartment. Come see what I built with my cereal. And I finished my book report, Isabella added. The one you helped me start. Raphael watched Valentina allow herself to be dragged toward the kitchen, her face lighting up with a genuine joy that had been absent during her society days. This version of Valentina, the one who cared more about children's homework than charity gala seating arrangements, was someone he was still getting to know. I brought you something, Valentina said, holding up the wrapped box. For tonight. Isabella and Miguel tore into the wrapping paper with the enthusiasm that expensive gifts had never quite lost for them, even after 6 months of security. Inside was a matching set of children's jewelry, simple but elegant pieces that would complement their formal outfits without overwhelming them. They're beautiful, Isabella breathed, holding up a delicate silver bracelet. And look. Miguel showed off cufflinks shaped like tiny footballs. They're perfect. I wanted you to have something special for your first big charity gala as a family, Valentina explained, her eyes meeting Raphael's over the children's heads. Something to mark the occasion. It was a thoughtful gesture, but Raphael recognized the deeper meaning. Valentina was acknowledging that tonight would be the public debut of their unconventional family unit at a major social event. The press would undoubtedly make note of the billionaire, his adopted twins, and his ex-fiancée all appearing together. The story would write itself. Thank you, Tia, Isabella said, already fastening the bracelet around her wrist. We'll be the most elegant family at the party. You certainly will be, Valentina agreed, and Raphael caught the slight emphasis on family, a word she used more carefully than the children did, as if she was still earning the right to be included in it. What kind of family traditions do you think are most important? Tell us about your favorite family moments in the comments below. That evening, the Grand Hyatt São Paulo had been transformed into a wonderland of silver and white for the annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across tables set with Brazilian orchids, and the city's elite moved through the ballroom in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, their jewelry catching the light as they wrote checks that would make headlines in tomorrow's society pages. But as Raphael walked into the ballroom with Isabella on one arm and Miguel on the other, followed by Valentina in an elegant navy dress that cost a fraction of what her old wardrobe used to run, he realized he wasn't seeing the event through his old eyes anymore. Where he once would have noted business opportunities and social hierarchies, he now saw the actual purpose behind the glittering facade, the children who would benefit from tonight's donations, the programs that would be funded, the lives that would be changed. Papai, Isabella whispered, there are so many people. And they're all staring at us, Miguel added, but he didn't sound worried. 6 months of being Rafael Mendez' son had given him a confidence that poverty had never been able to steal. They were indeed attracting attention. Rafael could feel the ripple of awareness that followed their entrance, the whispered conversations, the discreet photographs, the calculations of social observers trying to categorize this unusual family configuration. But there was something different about the attention tonight. Along with the curiosity and speculation, Rafael sensed something that might have been approval, even admiration. The story of how he'd found Isabella and Miguel, and how Valentina had chosen love over convenience, had become part of São Paulo's social mythology. Instead of scandal, they'd become a symbol of something more authentic than the usual charity circuit performance. Rafael. Cubom TV. The voice belonged to Dr. Patricia Mendonça, director of the Children's Foundation and one of the few people in São Paulo's social circles whom Rafael genuinely respected. She approached with the warm smile of someone who'd watched the transformation of his family with professional and personal interest. Patricia, Rafael smiled, I'd like you to meet my children. Isabella and Miguel. This is Dr. Mendonça. She runs the foundation we're supporting tonight. Isabella stepped forward with the careful politeness she perfected for formal situations. It's a pleasure to meet you, Doutora. Thank you for helping children like we used to be. The simple statement packed an emotional punch that left Dr. Mendonça momentarily speechless. Then she knelt down to Isabella's eye level, her expression serious and respectful. It's an honor to meet you both, she said. And I want you to know that every real we raise tonight will go to helping more children find families as wonderful as yours. Miguel beamed at the compliment, while Isabella nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of what Dr. Mendonça was saying. As they moved through the ballroom, Rafael was struck by how many people wanted to meet Isabella and Miguel, not as curiosities or photo opportunities, but as real children with real stories. Other families with adopted children approached to share their experiences. Business associates who'd never shown interest in Rafael's personal life asked thoughtful questions about the adoption process. Most surprisingly, several people mentioned that seeing Rafael's transformation had inspired them to look into adoption or increase their charitable giving to children's causes. You've started something, Valentina observed quietly as they watched Isabella and Miguel charming a table full of São Paulo's most influential philanthropists. Look around. Half the people here are talking about adoption or mentoring programs. Rafael followed her gaze and realized she was right. The conversation at table after table seemed to center on children's welfare, on how to make a real difference rather than just writing checks for tax benefits. Maybe that's what was missing before, he said thoughtfully. Maybe people needed to see that charity isn't just about money, it's about opening your life to someone who needs what you have to give. The evening's program began with the traditional speeches and award presentations. Raphael had been honored at events like this before, usually for the size of his donations. Tonight, he was receiving the Foundation's Family of the Year award, not for his wealth, but for demonstrating how adoption could transform everyone involved. When his name was called, Raphael made his way to the stage with Isabella and Miguel beside him, their small hands firm in his as they faced the ballroom full of applauding guests. 6 months ago, Raphael began, his voice carrying clearly through the room, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about blood, about tradition, about maintaining the same patterns generation after generation. He looked down at Isabella and Miguel, who gazed back at him with a complete trust that still took his breath away. These two incredible children taught me that family is actually about choice. It's about deciding to show up for someone every day, about protecting someone who can't protect themselves, about loving someone not because you have to, but because you want to. The ballroom was completely silent, the kind of attention that speakers dream of but rarely achieve. Isabella and Miguel didn't just get a family when I adopted them, Raphael continued. I got a family too. I got a purpose bigger than business deals and profit margins. I got the chance to be the kind of man I wanted to be but didn't know how to become. He paused, his eyes finding Valentina in the audience. She was crying openly, her hands pressed to her heart. Family, Raphael said, isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to discover that the family you choose loves you back just as fiercely as you love them. The applause that followed wasn't the polite society clapping that usually marked these events. It was sustained, emotional, the kind of response that comes from an audience that's been genuinely moved. As they returned to their table, Raphael felt Isabella squeeze his hand. Papai, she whispered, that was beautiful. It was true, he replied. That's what made it beautiful. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Isabella and Miguel had been asleep for an hour, exhausted by their first major social event but glowing from the attention and acceptance they'd received. Raphael and Valentina sat on the terrace overlooking São Paulo's glittering skyline, sharing a bottle of wine and the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the months. I have something to tell you, Valentina said finally, her voice carrying a note of nervousness that made Raphael look at her more closely. What is it? I've been offered a job, she said, running the literacy program for the state of Minas Gerais. It's a big position, important work, the kind of thing I always thought I wanted. Raphael felt his stomach drop. That's in Belo Horizonte. Yes. 4 hours from here. They sat with that reality for a moment, both understanding what it would mean for their carefully constructed family dynamic. It's a good opportunity, Raphael said finally, because he'd learned that sometimes loving someone meant supporting their dreams even when it was difficult. It is, Valentina agreed. But she trailed off, staring out at the city lights as if they might hold the answer to whatever she was struggling to say. But Raphael prompted. But I keep thinking about what you said tonight, about family being about showing up, about being present instead of perfect. She turned to face him, and Raphael saw something in her expression that reminded him of the night she'd stopped her wedding, a moment of choosing authenticity over expectation. I've spent so many years chasing the next opportunity, the next social advancement, the next thing that would prove I was successful, she said. But for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. I'm doing work that matters with children who need what I have to give. I'm part of a family that... She paused, searching for words. That lets me be who I actually am instead of who I think I should be. Raphael felt his heart begin to beat faster. What are you saying? I'm saying I turned down the job, Valentina said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. I'm saying that Isabella and Miguel need consistency, and they've accepted me as part of their lives. I'm saying that for the first time ever, I'm choosing love over career advancement. She reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt both familiar and completely new. I'm saying that I'd like to stay, if you'll have me. Not as the woman I used to be, not as someone trying to prove anything or gain anything, but as someone who wants to help raise two incredible children and maybe learn how to be part of the kind of family I never thought I deserved. Raphael looked at their joined hands, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a bitter man nursing his wounds and planning revenge. Valentina had been trapped in a marriage built on social advancement rather than love. Isabella and Miguel had been street children with no one to protect them. Now they were something none of them had planned, but all of them had chosen. A family built on forgiveness, growth, and the radical decision to love each other as they were rather than as they thought they should be. "There's one condition," Raphael said, and Valentina's face tensed with worry. "What?" "We do this right," he said seriously. "No rushing, no assumptions. Isabella and Miguel's stability comes first. Always. We take time to figure out what we are to each other now, what we want to be." Valentina's smile was radiant. "I wouldn't want it any other way." "And," Raphael added, "you have to promise me something else. Anything. Promise me that if you ever start choosing status over love again, if you ever start calculating social advantages instead of just being present for the people who need you, I'll call you on it. And you'll listen." Valentina laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace like music. "I promise," she said solemnly, "but I think Isabella will call me on it long before you have to. That little girl has a way of seeing straight through people's pretenses." They sat together in comfortable silence, looking out over the city where their story had begun with heartbreak and was now beginning again with hope. From inside the penthouse came the sound of small feet padding across marble floors. "Papai? Tia Valentina." Miguel's sleepy voice called. "I had a bad dream." Without hesitation, both Raphael and Valentina rose to go comfort him, moving together with the unconscious synchronization of people who'd learned to put children's needs first. As they tucked Miguel back into his bed and kissed Isabella's forehead, she'd woken up too, because twins always seem to sense when the other needs comfort. Raphael realized that this was what happiness actually looked like. Not the glittering perfection of charity galas or society weddings, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing you were exactly where you belonged, with exactly the people who needed what you had to give. "Boa noite, meus amores," Valentina whispered to the children. "Boa noite, minha familia," Raphael added, and meant every word. Outside, São Paulo continued its restless dance of ambition and achievement, but inside the penthouse that had finally become a home, for people who'd found each other against all odds settled into the peaceful sleep of a family that had chosen love over everything else. 1 year later, the small chapel in Campos do Jordão was a world away from the opulent grandeur of the Palacio dos Cedros. Surrounded by mountains and decorated with simple white flowers from the local market, it felt more like a family celebration than a society event, which was exactly what Raphael and Valentina had wanted. Isabella stood as maid of honor in a soft pink dress, carefully holding Valentina's simple bouquet of Brazilian roses. Miguel served as best man, his chest puffed with pride as he carried the rings they'd chosen together. Simple gold bands engraved with the Portuguese word escolhido, chosen. The guest list was small: close friends, Dr. Mendonça from the foundation, a few family members who'd supported their unconventional journey. Notably absent were most of the society figures who'd witnessed the dramatic end of Valentina's first engagement attempt. This wedding was about celebration, not performance. As Padre Francisco, the same priest who'd officiated the wedding that never was, spoke about love, family, and second chances, Raphael found himself actually listening to the words instead of just enduring the ceremony. "Marriage," the priest said, "is not the joining of two perfect people, but the commitment of two imperfect people to grow together, to choose each other daily, and to build something beautiful from whatever materials life provides." When it came time for vows, Valentina spoke first, her voice steady and clear. "Raphael, 1.5 years ago, I thought I knew what I wanted from life. I was wrong about almost everything, but I was especially wrong about love. I thought it was something you negotiated, something you calculated, something you earned through good behavior and social advancement." She paused, her eyes moving to Isabella and Miguel before returning to Raphael. "You and our children taught me that real love is actually much simpler and much harder than that. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other not because it's convenient or advantageous, but because you can't imagine being anywhere else." Raphael felt his throat tighten as she continued. "I promise to choose you and Isabella and Miguel every day, in big ways and small ways. I promise to put our family first, even when the world offers shinier alternatives. And I promise to never again confuse what I want with what I think I should want." When Raphael's turn came, he looked out at the small congregation and realized that everyone present had played a role in bringing them to this moment. "Valentina," he began, 6 months ago, I thought my story was about finding love and losing it. I thought I was here to prove something about moving on, about being better off alone." He glanced at Isabella and Miguel, who were watching with the serious attention that children bring to important grown-up moments. But our children taught me that the best stories aren't about finding love or losing it. They're about choosing it, over and over again, even when it's complicated and imperfect and doesn't look like what anyone else expects. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I promise to choose you, not as the woman you used to be or the woman you think you should be, but exactly as you are. I promise to choose our family, in its beautiful, unconventional, perfectly imperfect form. And I promise that our home will always be a place where love matters more than status, where being real matters more than being right. The ceremony was brief, focused more on the commitment than the pageantry. When Padre Francisco pronounced them married, the applause came from less than 50 people, but it felt more meaningful than the polite clapping of hundreds. As they walked back down the aisle as a family, Mr. and Mrs. Mendez with Isabella and Miguel Mendez beside them, Raphael caught sight of their reflection in the chapel's stained glass window. They looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that couldn't be staged or calculated. The reception was held at a local posada, with traditional Brazilian music and food that Isabella and Miguel had helped choose. As the afternoon wore on, Raphael found himself watching his family with wonder that still felt fresh after all these months. Isabella was teaching Valentina a complicated clapping game she'd learned at school. Miguel was charming the other guests with stories about his latest football victories. Valentina was laughing, really laughing, in a way that transformed her entire face. And Raphael realized that this was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the perfect love story, but the real one. Not the family that looked right from the outside, but the one that felt right from the inside. As the sun set over the mountains of Campos do Jordão, casting golden light across their small celebration, Raphael took Valentina's hand and felt the solid weight of their rings, symbols of choice, commitment, and second chances. No regrets? He asked quietly. Valentina looked around at their unconventional wedding, their unconventional family, their unconventional life that had grown from the ruins of more conventional dreams. None whatsoever, she said firmly. This is exactly where I belong. Isabella appeared at their side, tugging on Valentina's dress with a determined expression she wore when she had something important to say. Mommy Valentina, she said, still adjusting to the new title. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for letting me, Valentina replied, kneeling down to hug the little girl who'd helped save them all. Miguel joined their family huddle, his arms wrapping around everyone he could reach. This is the best family in the whole world, he announced with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Looking around at the faces of the people he loved most, Raphael realized that Miguel was absolutely right. They were, indeed, the best family in the whole world, not because they were perfect, but because they were theirs. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disruptions. Sometimes the family you choose becomes more precious than the one you planned. And sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin not with once upon a time, but with what if we tried again? What's the most important lesson about love and family that you've learned in your own life? Share your story of chosen family, second chances, or unexpected blessings in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.